Welcome to the Craftsman Podcast, where we want to help build people who love better, live better, and leave the world better through raw and honest conversations.
Let's go.
What's up, everybody? We are having another episode of the Craftsman Podcast, and I've been pretty excited about this one. This has been a little while in the making. I'd like to introduce Joe Madison and Phuong Marquez. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Yes. And they're with Demand Disruption. God is using them to do amazing work in our city and hopefully soon around the world. She was telling me a little bit about maybe a connection overseas, which is pretty crazy. So it's great to have you guys.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Today's going to be about a topic I'm sure is going to ruffle little feathers, hopefully challenge a lot of people, specifically in the church, as we talk about pornography and how that's tied to sex buying and sex trafficking and all of the things. It's so much more than that, I realize. But why don't you guys go ahead and talk about Demand Disruption a little bit, which is the organization that you guys have, what it is and how you're involved and how you got there.
Sure. So I always struggle with this because there are so many different ways to explain it. But essentially, I found this Demand Disruption as an extension of an organization that I left my career to work with. I was in oil and gas. I was in strategic sales for about 25 years. And it's funny, whenever you say things like, I should be volunteering more, I should be doing more, there's a downturn in the industry and you get laid off. It's like, oh, and then God's like, what did you say? Yeah, I heard you say something like that. And so I'm married to an incredible woman who said, I'll go back to work if you feel like this is what you're called to do. So that's exactly what we did. We traded roles. She brought in the money. She still is. And I went and volunteered and started doing work understanding this whole trafficking thing. And I didn't intend to, but what I brought with me to it was this kind of capital project mindset. How is this thing so resilient, and how deep does it go? Why can't we beat it? And why is it in America now? You know, a lot of questions that became answered. And from those answers, we started to develop the groundwork of what Demand Disruption was going to be. And then as we did that, we got to a point where we realized there were points we could intercede and a lot of the things we were seeing, which we'll get into today. And that's as far as we took it. And then I actually poached this person directly from a church.
Hey, that's good.
It was one meeting, and I was sitting in that meeting going, yeah, I'm definitely going to steal this person.
Isn't that funny how, total sidebar, but how we have this mindset, we have such a small church mindset where like we get real connected to, these are my people and this is our project. And it's so funny how God says, I'm not sure that's how it's supposed to go.
Yeah, no.
That's good. Yeah. Paul, how'd you get started here?
I just wanted to say first, yes, thank you for having us. And this is really special for me because it's my first podcast.
Hey, let's go. I love it. This is great.
Yeah. So long story short, I started in anti-trafficking work back in 2012 as an intern for another organization that worked with teen trafficking victims.
Yeah.
While I was there, we had this Christmas market that we did every year. And I ran into this company called Come and Taste It Salsa, run by this guy.
I forget this story every time.
Hold on a second. You had a company called what?
I still got it.
Come and Taste It
Salsa. Come and take it, the flag.
Oh, I get
Yes.
it.
Come and taste it. Okay.
That's amazing.
Yes. And so
That's so good.
I actually also found out in the same event that he was a part of an organization called The People Not Pixels. I learned about how they were making those connections already early in the game about how pornography connects to human trafficking. And I was always like, I love this group. I love what they're doing. I love what they stand for. And kind of fast forward a couple of years, kind of dabbled in education a little bit, stepped out because of a family emergency that happened. And then COVID happened. And I was like, I want to go back to school and kind of learn a little bit more about education and how can I take this experience and help at-risk youth, how to help community understand how to reach at-risk youth. And at the same time, my church was starting their anti-trafficking ministry. And they heard about my experience and they were like, hey, how about you lead this? And we were talking about it, me and the pastor, and we were saying, let's focus on two organizations. one of them being demand disruption. And so I asked Joe to go into this meeting as a church partner. And then a couple weeks later, he calls me and he's like, hey, what are you up to these days? Like, what's going on in your life? And I was like, I kind of think I know what this guy is about to ask me, but I'm not sure. But I tell him like what I've been doing and then what I'm up to. And then like a week later, he's like, do you want to work with us? Do you want to work for us? And I was like, I knew you were going to.
That's so good.
You told me.
Yeah. I knew you were going to.
That's a God thing right there.
Yeah.
I love that. Dude, I love that. You know, the journey is always so interesting. Okay, I think it's really, really important. The name, we've joked about all the name iterations of the organization, but the one it's landed on is perfect because it speaks exactly to what it is. So when you hear demand disruption, that's specific for a reason. Can you explain why demand is in there?
I'll go first about how it came about.
Yeah.
Because you're right. The reason we're called Demand Disruption, now it was a name that I came up with but it was one of 12. And we put it out there to our followers and we let them vote on it. And so really that name, one, was created because our old name just wasn't telling the story of what our partners, our volunteers were doing.
Right.
And then what we were trying to do as an organization. And then to have that be the one they selected really felt like incredible alignment. And so they selected that. And the second place name that we listed, and they told me I was done for listing it. So they, take that, when you see this, you know who you are.
I'm just a call out, strong on just go for it.
I need just that 12
Go for this jugular.
It's 30 seconds I can send them.
That's awesome.
I put love, disrupt, defend.
Yeah.
And that was it. That was it. That was going to be the name of the org. And that was actually second place finisher. So it's our tagline.
Yeah.
It's also our imperative.
Yeah. Because I think what people don't realize, the reason it's called demand disruption, because it is a business that is happening in the world. Human beings are being used as commodities. It's starting to become more normal information that you can sell a gun or a drug once, but you can sell a human over and over and over again. And there is a demand that's created, supply and demand, right? There is a demand that's created by what we're going to talk about now, which is pornography, which produces fantasy, which we'll go to. And so it requires supply. And if you can disrupt the demand, it should follow that the supply will dry up.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big deal because most of it, this is harmless and this is not that big of a deal. And it's just affecting me and so forth and so on. So demand disruption, man, doing hard work, doing great work. We're going to share some stories. But I wanted to kind of I want to jump into pornography for a second, if we can in general. And I want to talk about how pornography is tied to the ultimate act of buying sex. I was introduced to pornography when I was in 6th grade or 7th grade by a friend, and my father was discerning enough to tell me and eliminate the friendship. But it was after it had been, because exposure had happened for me. And that began for me a very difficult journey and battle with temptation and lust and failure and shame and guilt. And it just, the enemy got his hooks in me. I was not a Christian at all. But it still was attached with this shame and guilt. Intrinsically, at first, you're like, something's not right. Even as a 6th grader who was not following Jesus, I was like, this can't be right. And it's not that like the desire for sex is bad, which is what the church, unfortunately, inadvertently teaches us.
Dirty, it's naughty, it's bad.
Exactly. It's because the context matters, and it's meant for freedom within a context of a marriage, right? With a husband and a wife. But that journey led me, golly, how the enemy uses that to twist and harm and keep captive. Because that's how you felt. For me, you feel captive. And then there's, how do you get freedom from that? So this is kind of what we'll talk about today. So let's talk about that a little bit. What's the correlation between pornography and sex buying?
We both have thoughts.
Yeah, just jump in.
You should lead with this because this is, yeah.
Here, we have these infographics that are helpful for explanations like this, but the thing that I would point to is pornography is human trafficking's greatest commercial. And that sounds almost inflammatory. Oh, well, whatever. That's dramatic. Let's look at it, right? Whether you have a smartwatch on your wrist, shoes on your feet, car in your driveway, why did you buy that one? Where did you see something that made you think, I want that, not that. I want this one. There was some sort of advertisement. But here's the difference. So we talk about supply and demand. There's a direct correlation to what I see and what I want. And while pornography delivers that with instant gratification, I go to see this page. I know I'm going for sexual gratification somehow by myself. I'm gonna watch that. I'm gonna act out, and that's gonna create a feedback loop where there was pleasure in my brain because I acted out. I'm gonna do it again and again. But that's not the story. That in itself is a transaction. Okay, I saw it, and I know I want to see it, and I can go there and get that. The terrifying thing about pornography is the way it changes your brain. Because there is a reward center in your brain that God put there and designed so that we would have that type of behavior in our life that's good for us. It also works for things that aren't so good for us. I mean, even if we're talking about Dr. Pepper, I probably shouldn't drink it. I drink it all the time.
Yeah.
I like it. Now, let's really drill this down. I go to watch pornography. I see it. For some people, that's enough. There's an acting out behavior, and then when they do that, gratification, and that's it. But for a lot of them, and the porn industry knows this, it's not enough anymore. There's a tolerance that's built up. There's a stair step. We call it the escalation dynamic, which we developed.
Yeah.
This escalation brings you to, okay, I've seen it. I kind of want to engage with it. And so that online will look like a webcam. It may look like other digital ways to interact with somebody. And in your mind, you still have, they're brilliant with their sales cycle. It's deceiving, it's devious, it is not an accident. They are brilliant with it. Okay, it was me in a video, it's me in a person, but it's not really me in a person. I'm not in the room with that person. I'm not committing adultery. I'm not cheating. It's just, here's a webcam. No big deal. Or I go to a strip club. Well, they're an employee. I'm a customer.
Right.
Should we change all the titles? This is not a judgment conversation. This is, do we truly understand the sales cycle that we're in the middle of? And that's what it is. It's a sales cycle. And then finally, you've got on these websites, okay, I've seen it, kind of engaged, webcam, strip club, whatever. Now I want to experience it. And you can do all of that on the porn site because it'll say meet local girls, lonely mom, whatever. You click on that. And when we're sitting in front of a man who's buying sex in a hotel room because he was part of an operation that law enforcement did, we're there to talk to him. That's exactly his path. 90% of them saw something, clicked on that, got to an escort page. So that website went from, just whatever, red blood American male, pornography, what's the big deal, which we've normalized in our culture.
Totally. We'll get to that. I want to talk specifically about that too.
It's gone from that to, that was a sales cycle direct conduit to prostitution.
Yep.
It's a digital pimp. I am now arranging to meet with this person and have sex with them by paying them. And so often that person, that supply, we take those basic terms, was fulfilled via human trafficking.
There's this, it's an oversimplification, but, you don't end up at Outback Steakhouse getting the filet mignon on accident. It's because commercials and marketing, their strategies are very clear. Right. There's a whole market in the world for people to do videos and photographs that make you desire the product that they have for you. So a steak, like today, I guarantee I'm gonna want a steak later just because I'm talking about it. But you see, they don't just take a picture of a flank of meat sitting on the thing. No, it's a sequence and it's juicy and you see the seasoning.
It's the best.
Right? It's
all your senses are engaged.
Yeah.
What you've been wanting your whole day or life or week is this steak. And where do you find it? Outback Steakhouse. And then somebody's having a conversation and you're like, what do you guys want to eat? Gosh, I'm craving a steak. I really think we should go to Outback Steakhouse because I want this thing. This is what happens, right? And what's crazy is how the porn industry, again, it Google search. Somebody has a fantasy or they think about something, they put it in the Google search. That tells the industry what to make next. Yeah. It creates the demand, right? If you are looking up how to make your own ice cream at home, algorithm and AI is all built on this same philosophy.
Yeah.
Well, you're going to see videos now in your YouTube feed for how to make an ice cream on your own.
We could talk about that all.
Yeah, because
Pornhub's reviews, all of that.
since, before it had the whole thing where it was shut down, there's like these trends that they would publish every single year. And they're like, unfortunately, it seems like they're super proud of it. But they have like all of these like data analysts and researchers, and they break down so many things, like from generations, like what topics each generation talks about, which times of the day, which holidays in the year where it's most active. And since coming on to demand disruption and learning more about how this industry operates, and especially with my connection to talking to community members and families about how it's impacting children, we're finding out that they're making content based off of like animation characters, beloved animation characters, gaming. And so it's something that I hope people can kind of see and understand as we talk more about these correlations and how it does play into that.
Yeah. So Phuong, you talk a lot in the trainings that you do. I wish we could just do a full training right now, which we can. But I know, right? There are some staggering statistics and information. So I'm just going to rapid fire a couple at you that you can maybe offer to people, because most people are completely ignorant. What's the average age now of first exposure to pornography?
We like to say average age is 9, just across all of like research.
9 years old.
9 years old.
9 years old. I just don't want to rush that.
Yeah.
Because that's the average age of exposure. It was before the average age of being trafficked on the street was 12. That was some years ago. I don't know if the average has changed.
Still in that range from what we can tell. The metrics we're able to gather between really 15 to 17 is what we say, but 13 is not uncommon.
Right.
13-year-old is not uncommon.
I've heard of the statistic that somebody was rescued, a 6-year-old on the street.
A lot of like the teen victims I worked with, the other organization, they were actually trafficked like at home first.
Right.
By family members.
Familial trafficking is a big deal.
Yeah. And so they actually can trace their trafficking, your exploitation starting much younger than that, unfortunately.
So let's get back to the buying part. Let's talk about the normalization a little bit. So why is the normalization of pornography such a detriment, and how does that play into the pathway to buying sex?
I think for me, the way that I'm seeing this, we have this timeline that we touch upon where we talk about how a buyer doesn't get to that point of arrest, soliciting sex, just one day.
Right.
It all happens coincidentally with all of these commonalities, rather, that happen on these ages that lead up to that point. And so we have age 21, which is the average age of first purchase. And then we had to track back a little bit. So at age 18, this is when men are being able to go to the strip club for the first time. And that itself is also just, a hotbed of issues there. But we can't just stop there. We have to go back to age 15, where this is when 90% of students now have seen pornography.
90% of students have seen pornography at age 15. Parents, pay attention.
Yes. And so, and we see at this age, there's more, acting out behaviors as well that might be missed. And so like, that's something that we stress about a lot in our trainings. What are some of these acting out behaviors that, might see that, you're not seeing normally, from your child.
Yeah.
And then from there, back to age 12, this is when we're seeing children getting their first smartphones. And then back to age 9, this is the average age of exposure to pornography. And at the same time, victims are experiencing their own timelines that are very coincidingly with this timeline that we're talking about. And I think what scares me the most recently when I talk about this is that as our culture gets increasingly more porn prevalent, as things, get more readily available through technology, I think about how this timeline can be impacted 2 years from now, 5 years from now, where I hope and I pray that I don't have to talk about the average age of exposure being 5 or 6.
Right.
Or, the average, that 100% of students are exposed to pornography by age 15 and, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think like that's the thing that it can be scary to think about is that there's just so much going on and we had to be aware in order to be able to make a difference within our own, areas of influence.
Gosh, I think that it's in our day and age. I say our day and age because every generation says this. Oh, the world's going to crap in a handbasket. It's all going to junk, and like I get it, right? Because the older you get, you start getting, you become more aware of the wickedness in the world. And I say that not to be churchy, but it is what it is, right? And I'm talking about just within myself. I'm part of that. I'm part of the problem in the world, right? And what we can do is we can become wagon circlers. Look, let's just make sure my kid doesn't do that. Or even though most likely your kid has been exposed, if you have not given your kid a phone, they have 17 friends that do. Because when I was young, you went to the market, you had to risk going to the market or getting it from a friend, and then you'd have to go and pass it around physically to friends. That's what happened. Yeah. That's not what's happening now. Not only that, you don't even have to go and buy pornography from a website anymore because now it's become so normal in teenage culture. You just ask. I would never, confronting an actual human being, young woman when I was growing up to say, hey, let me see you naked.
Yeah.
That didn't have one, I didn't have the guts or courage to do that. And two, it wasn't normalized or desensitized yet to that.
It wasn't. We're doing it in a digital format, which turns into an in-school suspension or removal of the technology. But if I did that in a setting when I was in high school, I would have been in the principal's office and they would have been calling the police.
And her father would have found you in the parking lot is what would have probably happened.
Well, that's a whole different level of what's changed.
Right.
But when we look at, you really hit on it, something here. We didn't invent sin, lust, whatever.
That's right.
Now let's take it out of churchy language. We didn't invent one to hook up or seeing a girl and imagining what she looks like naked.
Right.
That exists. That has existed forever. Here's what's changed. From what was this? It says 1741 was the first Morse code. I got to look this up. No, 1841. All right, here's where I'm going with this. We went from Morse code to a beeper in 1981, like 150 years. That was our technology. That's what we were able to do in terms of personal communication.
Right.
From about 84 to 15 years later, we went from that to smartphones, to regular cell phones to smartphones. So we've all parented and grown up in this gap of time that is unprecedented. Everybody talks about technology gap and there's generation gap. Hold my beer. You ain't seen nothing yet.
Right, 100%.
We tried to figure things out we were then bombarded with, we weren't even bombarded first. We had access to something we couldn't access otherwise.
That's right.
A digital version of what I would never walk up and ask somebody.
Agreed.
And then as that became us to them, it became them to us. This flow that was coming our way. And then algorithms changed everything. And then high-speed internet was an absolute game changer.
It did.
That technology, don't thank them because it was purely selfish, but the porn industry's business model really relied on high speed, high def.
Yeah.
And they pushed that technology to a point because they were such a player. And they've dictated our technology advances for a very long time. Yeah. From VHS to DVD to bandwidth.
And I think there's in this same conversation about normalization and acceptance, there was a case with Larry Flint, who owned Hustler magazine, which back in the day, I think it was in the 80s, maybe 70s and 80s, it was kind of pushed the boundaries of even the porn industry and the magazine industry because of how kind of it just pushed the
Playboy
boundaries.
Gentleman's nudity.
Gentleman's, right.
Hustler was graphic.
Right. And what happened was he went to court and he won a court case. And his court case that he won, it was freedom of press or freedom of expression or one of those two. I'd have to go back and look at it. But because he won that, it meant that you could basically publish whatever you want under the freedoms that we have. Not realizing, because people were ignorant to the actual goings on, which is no young woman grows up. No girl is born on this earth says, I want to be a porn star. I want to be taken advantage of. I want to be manipulated. I would like to be victimized and I would like to be oppressed. No little girl says that. but nobody understood the full scope of what was going on. It was already normalized in some sense. So when he won that, freedom for men, because it's not just a man thing. We'll get to this in a second. That freedom, our freedom to say, well, it's just pornography. It's no big deal. The girls like it.
It's just nudity. It's just sex.
Yeah.
It's no big deal. Yeah.
Our freedom to do that is at the expense of oppression and bondage of somebody else. And I think that that's a big deal. And nobody really talks about that.
There's always a cost.
Yeah.
Just because you're not paying it doesn't mean there's not a cost. And
That's right.
when we see the trend that we've seen in pornography, Phuong mentioned it earlier, this isn't an accident. What content is there? It's a recognition. Oh, we got more likes or we got more viewing. Oh, okay, then we want more content like that.
Yeah.
And being in this industry, I have the honor of working with survivors. She knows survivors. We have people who have really informed us on a level that you're not going to get in the popular culture.
Right.
And one of those people is somebody who did 50 adult films. She said, the scene I did never matched the call for me to come and do that scene. There was always pressure to do something else, to do this.
Mm-hmm.
There was always manipulation. In my contract, I was a kid. I didn't know what
Right.
the contract was. I just thought I was making money, and
Yeah.
she had her own trauma. But it is a manipulation that is systematic. And then the last thing I want to say is we talked about trafficking. That's the fundamental connection
Yeah.
that we made at the beginning. But if you notice, when Phuong went through our timeline, she mentioned trafficking one time. Everything else was the things that we deal with. And it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman.
That's
It doesn't
right.
matter if you're an adult or a child. Doesn't matter if you're a Christian or whatever.
That's right.
These things are present in your life, and that's why this is so relative.
So is this a world problem or a church problem? Does this affect just people out there, or is this something that that Christians also struggle with, this pornography thing? I know the answer. It's important for us to say it.
I mean, of course, I think that, the world is struggling, but they don't realize that they're struggling. So, but I think there's something about this new generation that's kind of seeing this for themselves. And they're seeing, people, celebrities that they love, like Billie Eilish and Terry Crews, like speaking out about how pornography has impacted their lives, how it's impacted, how they view their bodies. And they're getting this sense of, this is such a low par. Like they deserve better than this. The young women that I've been able to talk to. And even yesterday we were talking with another organization that has like an app that they install on their phones to to help monitor, right? So that it's an accountability measure.
Yeah.
And they're seeing 100 and 150 searches a day for people that want to look up and have accountability apps on their phones. And so I feel like from the world, people do they're starting to realize it is a problem. The church, I think, is just very difficult to be able to have these types of conversations. I think from the 3 years that I've done workshops with a lot of churches, most of the time, parents and are receptive. But there are also a lot of parents that are like, I don't need to be talking to my kids about this. Like, my kid is 10, 13. Sometimes they're like 6 or 7. Like, I don't need to be talking about this. They don't need to be learning about this right now. And
It might create interest.
Yeah, that's always the argument, right? So I don't want to start something that is not there yet.
And I struggle so hard to be able to speak to them in a way that is convicting, because it's like, if you are not the ones to be telling about these things, then teaching them about these things, they are learning it without a doubt somewhere else with somebody else. And I think too, it's hard as well, like the way that, our lives are structured naturally. We have like our home, and we put so much emphasis in our home as we should. But also, there are homes that, don't have all of the structures in place to be able to have these conversations. And I'm like, how can we as community, better surround not just our home, but also the homes that are around us? Yeah. If we know that there are, single moms in our church that are raising young boys or even young girls, how can we be helping them, come alongside them? I read an article the other day about just how a single mom said, like, one of the best things that you could do for your children is have them have a relationship with their dad. Like, go visit them in jail if you have to, but like their children needs to have a relationship with their dads. And so I think that's kind of where I see the problem from the worldly and from the Christian church perspective.
I love the way you answered that, because the easy answer would have been, yes, it's a world and church problem. But instead of spending time on that, you talked about what the realities are and what the relationships are with the world and the church. Because, I mean, we take statistics on the minute. We talked at the point of arrest. And those statistics reflect things that most people wouldn't consider. They're not these monsters and predators. They're these husbands and fathers who are going to church.
And talk about that a little bit, about kind of those, I know we're not talking about people, names and those things, but give a little bit about that. I think this is huge for people to understand.
Yeah, so Demand Disruption enjoys a unique privilege of working closely with law enforcement. And this is through the Human Trafficking Rescue Alliance, which is, there are some others around the country, but this is sort of the standard, is what we've seen. So it's a division, it's the Southeast Texas division of the Department of Justice. And we work with law enforcement at the point of arrest. So a man's in handcuffs. They showed up at that place for one thing. They didn't get that. They got something completely different. They're getting processed, and they're starting to realize, crap, I can't go back to work. I can't pick up my kid in 2 hours, because these are the real life tasks and things that they're doing when we meet them. Well, at that point of arrest, our whole goal is to have, yes, we're talking to somebody who's buying sex and fueling trafficking, but we're going to talk to them with empathy and vulnerability. Why? Because we just talked about a process that led them there that day. They did not wake up that day with no other influence deciding to buy sex. Don't mistake that for some sort of sympathy for them. Like, we're not there to hug a thug. Like, this is not it's going to be all right, buddy. You made a mistake. No, we don't use the word mistake. In fact, accountability begins in that first conversation.
That's right.
But if we can get to that second conversation, then we can talk to the father who has had a 6-year porn addiction and decided, because things aren't great with his wife at home, I'm gonna act on this. I just click this button, I can meet up with somebody. This shouldn't even be illegal. She gets money, I get sex. I mean, who loses here? That's what's being sold to us as a community. And that's why it's so easy for people to decide to convert on that.
Yeah.
Again, accountability, there is never any sort of exception there. You will be accountable.
Absolutely.
We'll hold you accountable in our conversations. But if we don't lead with empathy and vulnerability, pretending like we couldn't be on the other side of that table, brother, I struggled with porn for 7 or 8 years.
That's right.
If I wasn't married and had so much to lose in this incredible relationship and had structure, and my worth came from that, and I knew that I would never go beyond that. I was never tempted to buy sex. I've never been to a strip club.
Yeah.
That said, that
doesn't mean you could
do with circumstances. I was talking about it earlier. If my circumstances change, then does what I seek to fulfill me change? I'm not the best judge of what is fulfilling whenever I'm in crisis or struggling.
Right.
We're human beings. Whenever we're struggling, what we think will fulfill us changes. It's a sliding scale from a bowl of ice cream to buying sex.
Yeah. We're all one decision away from being on the other side of the table, right?
And it's a ripple effect.
Yeah.
That then continues. And so as I decide this, and then this is okay. Well, I would never do that. Well, now I've been exposed to it 3 or 4 times in pornography. Well, I kind of wonder what that's like. And then I continually change. And what's changing, bottom line, is our identity. We're seeing a change. We're getting very far from who we are and what we value. And we're acting out in a way that's in conflict with that. And that's where the greatest issue with this is.
Well, because you said something, you said they're not all monsters, because we have a perception. Anybody who buys sex is a pedophile and a monster, right? And all of those things are monstrous, 100%. But what's the data saying about what kind of men these are? Can you just share a little bit about that?
Yeah. So getting to the end of that timeline, okay, all these exposure contributing factors, now I'm buying sex and I've been arrested. You're sitting in front of me and I'm talking with you, or Mike Steele or Mauricio or any of our awesome volunteers like Taylor. You're sitting in front of a person and you're starting to have to take some account. We want to learn who that person is. And our data tells us that that person is not some predator. It's not the guy in the white van waiting to snatch somebody. It's not this guy who wants to do awful things. Now, there are monsters.
Of course.
I always clarify that.
Yeah.
I've sat in front of monsters. I've sat in front of murderers. And that came out in our conversation whenever I was asking about why he's there that day.
Yeah.
But that's the exception. Most of the time, it is somebody that is at the end of this process of contributing factors that culminate in what becomes buying sex and fuels human trafficking.
How many are fathers?
I think our last statistic was 44% of the men that we meet are fathers.
They have kids.
Yes.
They're married.
They're married. I can tell you on our last operation 2 weeks ago, I talked to 11 men in one day. And of those men, all but 2 were married and fathers.
Wow.
So if I hear that and I don't have the right context, my first thought is they should go to jail. How dare they how dare they betray their wife and their children? True. 100%.
Yeah.
My first operation I ever did, we had a training and all that, but then I was sitting across from these monsters, and the father in me, the brother in me, the husband, the son of a wonderful woman. That's who came out and was ready to go. Just lock that door. We got 5 minutes of justice. We'll take this right now.
That is such a neat joke. I feel that same way.
Oh, yeah, man. I feel like God designed me for that type of behavior, but he doesn't want me to engage in it. It's not fair.
Because that's not transformative.
It's not. It's a pound of flesh for me.
That's right.
And I got to feel like I taught him a lesson. He's not going to learn anything. I just shut him off and confirmed to him, this is what I am.
And
so they'll continue to do it.
And it also shuts down any way forward to freedom.
And it looks nothing like Christ.
That's exactly. That's the biggest reason.
They're going to leave there and they're going to, some of my word choice, they're going to be like, oh, that guy's a Christian. Judgment, finger wagging.
Yeah.
It looks nothing like Christ. And then I just failed in my greatest opportunity.
So this is probably a really great way to get into this particular question. Here's a question. Where has the church failed? And just to be clear, if you listen to this podcast, I do get at the church, which I'm a part of. So just to be clear, my job and our job is always to assess, are we being Christ-like? Are we doing it the way Christ asked us to? That does not mean to diminish sin or to diminish behavior. Mine starting with me, but we have to figure out a better way to engage the world so we can see transformation, freedom in Christ. So where have you guys seen that the church has difficulty, maybe in conversations, maybe in some of this area?
I think for me, my heart breaks a lot for those dads that are in, those fathers that are in, that Joe's spoken to at the Point of Rest, that has gone through our program. But my heart also breaks, I think, for like the 21-year-olds that have also come through their programs. Because I kind of just think back to being 21, and I'm like, I knew nothing about the world.
Right.
My peers were so important to me at that time in my life. Like if I had, a friend call me and she, was going through like a breakup or something, and she was like 45 minutes away, I would literally drop everything I had. Like, lunchtime with my grandma, I would like drop everything I had.
Sorry, grandma.
Let's score those friend points.
I'm out.
to go and be with her, And so I think that we need to be surrounding our younger followers better and giving them resources, giving them safe spaces to be able to talk about this. Because I think that's the number one thing that I run into the most whenever I'm in these workshops, is that this is one of the first times a parent is hearing about this issue. And this is one of the first times that they're hearing that other parents are also struggling with the same issue. And just one of the most beautiful things that I've gotten to experience is other parents being able to speak into another parent at one of our workshops. And I wish the church would naturally create these spaces.
To talk about it openly.
To talk about it openly. And it's hard. It's such a very, tricky, difficult subject to talk about. It comes with a lot of shame and guilt.
Right.
And I think we just need to be able to kind of continue to pull back those layers of what is the enemy telling us in this situation, and what is truly of the Lord that we should be listening to, because the voice of the enemy sounds so much like those peers, sounds so much like what technology, what music, what videos, streaming is telling us.
Yeah.
And we always joke about how we don't want to be this. We don't want to be working in this. We don't want to have this job.
Yeah.
We want this to be, we want this to be done with, And so that's something that I wish that, I could see more of the church being able to do, is creating these spaces, because it is so hard to go into a church right now and talk about buyers, because they hear human trafficking. And of course, it's so important to help survivors.
Sure.
It's so important. But if we're not going to ever shut off the gas, the fire's going to keep on going.
So good, yeah.
And so if we don't talk about that part, it's going to keep on going. And there's at the same time, there's that mindset that we talked about, how these are predators and these are monsters. People come up to my face and yell at me and tell me that these men should be, beat in a horse trough, or
castrated,
should be castrated. And I'm meeting them at like a faith-based events. And it's like, this is where we need more of this empathy, more of this safe space to talk about this.
It goes back to the idea of what a person in need looks like. And it goes even this idea. But what did Paul say? I'm the chief of all sinners. Yeah. He knew he was a murderer. He was saying yes to murder. People who were following Jesus. And when he got saved, when he met Jesus, his life was completely changed. He still had the same makeup. He understood all the law and all those things, but he knew more his sin. He understood. And I think when a Christian, and I think we have to personalize it a little more. The church seems so broad. You as a Christian, me as a Christian. If we don't understand the depths of our need with Jesus, we will never be empathetic for another sinner. And I think it's important to note, we have to take care of victims. Absolutely.
Yes.
What you were saying.
Yes.
And we have to understand that the men buying sex are also being victimized. They just don't know it.
Yeah.
They're not actually aware of it until they are aware of it.
Yeah, it's true. There's just so many ways to go with this, but we said the word earlier, identity, and it is at the core of really our organization. You mentioned Paul. What changed in Paul from being a murderer to somebody seeking to tell the good news of salvation to others, where they never die?
Right.
They live forever. What changed? Yes, Jesus, but his identity.
Yeah.
At his core, his identity changed. His identity was that these Christians, so on and so forth, his purpose was to slay them, was to vilify them.
Right.
And his legacy was going to be, I'm a Christian slayer. Like, this is what I am.
Yeah.
And I do it proudly because they're blaspheming. Jesus changed his identity. And then his purpose changed.
Yes.
Instead of killing, it was saving. And it was saving in Jesus' name, not in his own name.
Yeah.
And then his legacy was that he went from saying, I'm the greatest of all sinners, to saying, when comparing to other saints and apostles, he got a little big. He got a little proud of himself. He said, I am as much as any of these. And so we see that, that's the power, a testimony of an identity change.
Yeah.
And I liken the church in some ways to the parents we were talking about earlier. That technology gap that we've talked about, parents weren't ready for it. And they needed some disruption, unfortunately, to realize that there's a real issue here. They needed to be able to acknowledge it for what it is. And many times it comes in the form of their kid being exposed to it, or struggling with pornography, or their husband or wife acting outside of marriage from a lust perspective because of pornography and because of temptation. That's a disruptive thing. And so now they have to deal with it.
Yeah.
We want to be disruptive with the church in a way, because the church, I'm going to go to bat a little bit for the church, right?
Yeah, come on.
Some of this is the church willful ignorance in parts. But a lot of it is, well, how do we even start this conversation?
Yeah, it's overwhelming.
How do we talk to 300 people, 3,000 people, and do that for 3 services, and do that in a way that isn't vilifying and wagging our finger? There's not enough context.
Yeah.
There is a conversation in terms of biblical righteousness and talking about what the Bible says.
Sure.
And then with love saying, when you sin, or James 5:19, when one of you strays, bring them back. It'll cover a multitude of sins.
Yes.
If we do that as a church, then that's great. But there is more.
Yeah.
Because the person who heard that doesn't feel it the way they would if they knew, wait a second, I'm not buying sex and trafficking, but I am a consumer.
Yes.
I'm not a buyer, but I'm a consumer. As a consumer, I am creating demand for
That's right.
pornography, whatever, which hurts people.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want this to be a guilt trip. We want it to be an informed consumer.
Yeah.
What are you truly consuming? Is it in line with your identity? And if it's not, let's get to work. And the church, this is where I will say the church needs to step up. We want the church to not feel like a courtroom. And I don't think most churches mean to, but if I'm sitting and I'm rolling into church with my family and I'm putting on that face, I feel like I'm in a courtroom.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm guilty and I feel like this is terrible. And part of that is healthy, but that conviction then needs to come into a place that's a workshop and not a courtroom.
That's right.
I need to roll into a church and know that I can talk to the men's ministry lead or somebody, knowing that I'm going to be received as a brother in Christ and a sinner, or a sister in Christ.
Yeah.
If we can do that, then the church's full potential begins to be manifest throughout the entire congregation.
So good. How cool would it be if you walked into church having a suck week, like you just tanked, right? And you were able to walk up to pastor or another brother or sister, or especially the pastor, but that's a whole nother conversation. And walk and go, somebody says, how you doing? Say, you know what? I had a terrible week. I failed. I struggled with sin this week. In fact, I feel condemned. I feel ugly. And you were free enough to do that because somebody looked and go, you know what? Let's talk about it. Let's get down to it together. Because they're coming from a position of empathy. You said something about identity. We are new creations in Christ Jesus. The old is gone, the new has come. But when the new comes, all of a sudden we forget and we feel like we've always been new. And when we forget that, that's when we get into condemning others. I think this is why this conversation in church is so difficult, to your point, Phuong, right? Where we have forgotten the depths with which he came and saved us from. And so we put ourselves on the hook when we talk about it. Like for me, to talk about pornography means I can't pretend like it's never been a problem. I can't pretend like I've never struggled, and I can't ever pretend like I didn't fail in it. I, Pastor Johnny Marks, have created demand in the world because I have been a consumer. It's my fault that this problem exists.
A free man talking about his time in captivity in prison to a man in prison sounds like freedom.
That's right.
You can't just quote scripture and vilify.
Yeah.
If I can say that I struggle with porn. Like my wife's in the audience a lot, and at this point she's just like, okay, whatever.
Your wife and my wife probably feel similar at this time. But if Phuong says you have to kiss her, oh, here we go again.
No, but I mean, when I say that, what that is me just holding broken links.
That's right.
If I don't say it, then I know that's still attached. And if I'm a free man talking about my time in captivity, then the man in captivity can hear that this man is free talking about it.
And this possible.
And it's promised and possible.
That's right.
It is going to happen if you're willing to look at your identity, look at where that conflict is, go to Christ and go to fellow believers. That's where the church, we won't win this fight without the church.
That's right.
We've said that before.
I agree.
You look us up. Our business idea is not a faith-based org, but I can tell you right now, if we just try to legislate and penalize this thing, we're never going to win.
Well, and you won't actually get to the root of the issue, which in fact is I've been talking about this ad nauseum to people. There is a hard issue, which is what demand disruption is dealing with. And you are walking people into freedom. I kind of want to finish towards this direction. There's obviously so much more to talk about.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. I would love for people to understand, what are the components to freedom? What are the components for a man or a woman to walk out of addiction and bondage into freedom? What does that look like?
I know we're both going through so many ways we can take this.
Think about just maybe those key components that,
versus that, what we do with guilt.
Yeah, I think it's this
a big one.
Transformative journey where we have to kind of, like I said, peel back those layers of what is shame telling us? Shame's telling us I am broken. I can't be fixed. But guilt is actually a reaction that, happens with us when we know that when we've done something wrong. And not a lot of people I feel like sometimes you don't know what to do with that. And sometimes that can make guilt feel a lot like shame. But when we have that identity in place, we understand that this is guilt, and guilt is a reaction to something that we've done wrong, then we can fix it. Then we can move into a posture of repentance. And when we go through this posture of repentance, then we can arrive to I'm loved.
Yeah.
And what does love look like? Love means I'm healed, I'm restored, you know? And so, and I think too, just to comment on what both you guys are saying, you know, as freed men being able to share about your experiences, I think from like a woman's perspective, it can be such a healing thing too for wives to hear that a marriage can endure this. A marriage can endure this type of trial, and being able to get through it on the other side is just an incredible testimony. And so I think like for me, I want to kind of, I guess, end on an encouragement for, you know, the family that might be struggling with this. Like we've seen instances, you know, where a family, a marriage can endure through this.
I think there's this, I think we could do a whole podcast on the environment by which two sinners can walk in freedom together, a husband and a wife to walk in freedom. And it takes humility and acknowledgement and ownership and repentance and forgiveness and all those things. And because it's not just, I think this is elevated as like the thing, but there's other small things that get in the way of, and like a husband has to be willing to see his wife as like if you expect brokenness, which we should. When I look at Joe and Phuong, I'm like, oh, my two sinner friends.
Yes, that's right.
And you're looking at another sinner friend, because when you sin or when you fail, I can then look at you with compassion, kindness, and empathy and say, oh, let's go together and figure this out. The shame and guilt, here's what happens in a marriage for a lot of things, not just this. If I don't have a position of safety, you mentioned this earlier, if I don't trust that I can come, and the devil lies to people. The devil's lying to a man right now, a husband right now, who says, if I'm exposed as the sinner that I know that I am, and that they kind of know that I am, this is going to ruin my entire life, and I will always be a piece of crap, and nobody will love me. Because it goes back to this identity piece.
Everybody don't hurt my wife and kids.
And yeah, exactly. And there will be some hurt. So we have to work, as wives have to work also to create an environment. Husbands have to create an environment to where a person can say, hey, I'm a freaking mess right now. And I just can I tell you the truth? And will you love me anyway? This is why people don't come to Jesus in the first place. It's what took pride and ego says, God he won't let me in. I suck, you know?
And then for it to happen, it takes a disruption. It takes a discovery. It takes some sort of exposure. It takes something that is even more hurtful in that moment.
That's right.
Than self-realization that I have lost, I've gotten lost, and I've tried to self-medicate with poison.
Right, exactly right.
That's what we do. I mean, when Phuong said, I'm just listening to you talk about the hope of it.
Yes.
Let's get to that, because a podcast where people say things that are true isn't the same as one where people say things that you go, you know, I could act on that.
Yeah, let's go tell them. Tell them.
If somebody reached out to us and asked, and I'm struggling, and I know people will see this who are struggling.
Yes,
the reaching out part, that's the difference.
Yes.
We can do that with anonymity, but what we won't do it with is any sort of judgment. And you're going to find a chance to unload and unburden some with a person who is not going to just pat you on the back and say, well, you made a mistake, do better. They're going to come alongside and say, here's the work that needs to be done.
Amen.
Now, you said trust earlier. We're going to get real right now.
Come on.
If you're hearing this and you're struggling with pornography or adultery or something else, there are so many things that the devil is telling you. He wants you alone. He wants you isolated.
Yeah.
The rise of the individual in our culture keeps us separated.
That's right.
And as soon as we're separated and we're further away from God and we're closer to our own God ourselves, our desires, then we start to get further and further away from who we are and our identity.
Right.
And then we're in this isolated shame box. And when we're there is no accountability. There is no drawing from somebody else's hope and spirit and love, knowing that we have a different identity. And so it is as hard as saying, I'm going to do something. And then that something is as easy as emailing us, beginning a conversation at defender@demanddisruption.org. If you want to begin this conversation, man, woman, child, we can begin this conversation. I hope that there's a church that will have a podcast and talk about this, like Church 122 will do. When we look at this conversation at a church level, it's very, very, very different. And it changes these barriers.
Yeah.
And when we can change the barriers, we can put up boundaries. The boundaries are healthy. The barriers are bad, right?
Right.
And we live with barriers. And then for the man who's thinking, I can't tell because my wife will be upset with me or whatever, do not define the result that God will do with honesty.
That's right.
Let that honesty get you to a point where you want to confess what you're struggling with. Now, there's a process for that. We can help with some of that.
Yeah.
But the truth of the matter is that shame is the lie. The guilt is the conviction, and the Lord uses conviction.
Yeah, that's right.
But he will not. Shame is condemnation.
Yeah.
He's not going to do that. He's going to let you work through this. And you may lose some things along the way.
Yeah.
But God's restorative power is what you can invite in this process. And the last thing I'll say is, you can tell yourself that if I keep this quiet enough, and I hide it well enough, my wife and kids will never know.
Yeah.
You're not a strong enough container to keep it from leaking out.
That's right.
Even if they never confront you, that doesn't look like my husband. It doesn't look like my dad.
Yeah.
And then for a woman, it doesn't look like my wife. It doesn't look like my mom.
Yeah.
Having the courage to realize that I've started going down a road and I didn't truly understand what I was agreeing to, and now I'm lost. That is courage.
Yeah.
And courage will be rewarded by the Lord.
Yeah. And I think it's the internal destruction that happens trying to contain it. My wife says something that I tell people all the time. She goes, you choose your heart, right? And she got it from somebody else. But she says, choose your heart. The pain that you're living in, the anguish of shame, guilt, condemnation, right? Captivity. We get comfortable there. And it can be so much more scary to step into freedom because it's unfamiliar, even though it's better. Yeah. And so I just want to say this to friends, not friends, whoever's there, listen. Like, freedom is available right now. Hope is not lost. You have more purpose than you know that you have. Specific to pornography, the addiction, the need to break free from sex buying, demand disruption is the way to go. They have a process in place. It's just the thing to do. We will be a church. Now I'll put my pastor hat back on for a quick sec. We want to be a church, not just a global church, but a specific church that will create an environment where we can just talk about it. This is a first step so that we can get rid of the barriers and really get to this place of boundaries and freedom. I just want to say thank you for the very difficult work that you do. We're going to continue to be partners in ministry and grow our friendship. So thank you guys for listening. There's so much more. We could talk all day. I feel like we could have so much more great conversations. Didn't even get to the fun stories, some of the things that you guys have had a chance to do, but real lives are being changed. And we thank God for that and the stuff you guys are doing. If you want to support Demand Disruption, you can give them as much money as you have because it takes money to continue to create and create these pathways. They do it not for that reason, but it is beneficial. So if you want to support them, go to Demand Disruption and you can figure out a way to donate. If you want to be involved, let them know how to do that. What's the best avenue to get involved with Demand Disruption?
So first, just follow us on social media. We put out a lot of informational videos here and there just to be able to counteract against all the misinformation. Everything.
Great graphics you guys have.
Thank you. And so shout out to our social media person. But yeah, so simply just being able to share, pray for us.
Yeah.
We have situations here and there that come up that, definitely need prayer for. Nice. And then if you want to get involved with some of our projects, we're always needing researchers, people that are good with graphics, things like that. We love working with students. So if you're a student that's looking for a fall internship or a spring internship, I'd love to be able to work with you. You can email info@demanddisruption.org and we'll be in touch.
It can seem counterintuitive to try to end trafficking by giving money to an organization that works with buyers. I get that. The truth of the matter is, when we started this work, I thought that survivors would resent us and that we would be pariahs to them because we're working with the men who hurt them and could not be further from the truth. It's amazing the support we get from our survivor friends. And I've kind of taken something somebody told me and I've put it into a statement. And that person was a victim of trafficking for over 20 years. And essentially what has come of that is a statement that changing a buyer's heart is the most direct way to fight human trafficking. If we can stop one buyer, we're not stopping one transaction.
That's right.
And so, prayerfully consider giving to us. And as we do this work, come alongside us in different ways. If you have a gift for fundraising and want to be a part of what we're doing, let us know. But we're truly grateful. The podcast, yes, but to be in agreement with a church that really from its foundation says, let's create a culture so that this doesn't become a place where we see this hurt. Man, we're honored to be a part of it.
I love it. We're going to create a culture where we are honorable men of nobility, not in title and status, but in heart and in practice. So listen, you guys have a great day. We love you. We'll catch you on the next episode.